It was a cold December morning, and the sky above New York City was painted gray with clouds. At JFK Airport, passengers hurried through the terminals, dragging suitcases behind them as they rushed to catch their flights. Among them was Harold Jenkins, a frail but sharp-witted 78-year-old man who had spent most of his life working quietly in the background of the aerospace industry. Today, however, Harold wasn't thinking about planes or engineering. He was focused on something far simpler, seeing his grandchildren for the holidays. Harold's flight to Los Angeles was scheduled to leave at 9:30 a.m., giving him just enough time to grab a cup of coffee before boarding. With his cane in one hand and his boarding pass clutched tightly in the other, he shuffled toward Gate 27. His pace was slow but steady as he navigated the crowded terminal. Despite his age, Harold carried himself with dignity. Years of hard work and discipline had taught him to take pride in even the smallest things, like arriving early for a flight. When Harold reached the gate, he handed his boarding pass to the agent stationed there. She scanned it quickly, her eyes flicking across the screen of her computer. A moment later, her expression changed from neutral to slightly annoyed. "Sir," she said, frowning, "there seems to be an issue with your ticket." Harold blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, leaning closer to hear her over the noise of the bustling airport. "It says here that your reservation has been canceled," the agent replied curtly, tapping on her keyboard. "I'm not sure why, but we can't let you board without confirmation." Harold felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He had booked this flight months ago, double-checking every detail to ensure everything was in order. How could there be a problem now? "That's impossible," he insisted. "Check again, please. I paid for this ticket." The agent sighed dramatically, clearly uninterested in helping him. After a few more minutes of typing, she shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's nothing I can do. You'll need to contact customer service if you want to resolve this." By now, a small crowd had gathered around the gate, curious about the commotion. Some people glanced sympathetically at Harold, while others simply rolled their eyes, eager to get on the plane. Feeling increasingly embarrassed, Harold tried once more to explain the situation, but the agent cut him off mid-sentence. "Look, sir," she snapped, her patience clearly wearing thin, "we have a schedule to keep. If you don't have a valid ticket, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside so we can proceed with boarding." Before Harold could respond, two security officers appeared beside him. They were polite but firm as they guided him away from the gate. Harold protested weakly, insisting that he deserved better treatment, but no one listened. As he stood outside the terminal, watching the plane pull away without him, a deep sense of humiliation settled in his chest. But what stung the most wasn't just being denied entry. It was the way he had been treated. The gate agent hadn't cared about his explanation. She hadn't shown any compassion or willingness to help. Instead, she had dismissed him as if he were invisible, inconsequential. And then came the final blow. A snide comment muttered under her breath as she closed the jet bridge door. Old people shouldn't travel alone anyway. For a long moment, Harold stood frozen, staring at the departing plane through the large glass windows. His hands trembled slightly, gripping his cane, tighter than usual. Inside, a storm of emotions brewed: anger, shame, disbelief. But beneath all of that lay something else, a spark of determination. Harold Jenkins wasn't the kind of man to let injustice slide unnoticed. Though he looked frail and unassuming, he possessed a mind sharper than many gave him credit for. Decades earlier, he had worked as an aerospace engineer designing cutting-edge technologies that revolutionized air travel. Even after retirement, he kept up with advancements in the field, reading journals and tinkering with gadgets in his spare time. As he limped back to the terminal seating area, Harold began to think. This wasn't just about one rude employee or one botched flight. It was about a system that treated its customers as expendable, especially those who didn't fit into the mold of young, tech-savvy travelers. And Harold knew systems better than anyone. Sitting down in a quiet corner, he pulled out his phone and opened a notebook app. For the next hour, he jotted down ideas, thoughts about how airlines operated, where their weaknesses might lie, and how someone with insider knowledge could exploit those vulnerabilities. By the time he finished, Harold had sketched out the rough outline of a plan. He didn't know yet exactly what he would do, but one thing was certain: the airline would regret treating him the way they had, not out of spite, but because Harold believed in fairness. If they thought he didn't matter, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Little did anyone at the airport, or anywhere else, know that this seemingly ordinary elderly man was about to set off a chain reaction that would shake the entire aviation industry to its core. By the time Harold Jenkins returned to his small apartment in Queens, the initial sting of humiliation had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet but relentless determination. He placed his cane against the wall, hung up his coat, and sat down at the dining table. The notebook app on his phone was still open, filled with scribbled notes and half-formed ideas. But Harold wasn't satisfied with just vague thoughts. He needed specifics. The first thing he did was brew himself a strong cup of coffee. As the aroma filled the room, he pulled out his old laptop from the closet. It was an outdated model, the kind most people would have thrown away years ago, but Harold had kept it for sentimental reasons. Over the decades, this machine had been his companion during countless late-night projects and brainstorming sessions. Now it would serve him once again. Harold logged into his email and began searching through old contacts. Though he had retired over a decade ago, he still maintained loose ties with some former colleagues in the aerospace industry. Many of them were now high-ranking executives or consultants, but Harold knew they wouldn't turn him away if he reached out. After all, he had helped build the foundation of their careers. His first call was to an old friend named Richard, who worked as a cybersecurity expert for a major airline supplier. When Richard answered, Harold wasted no time getting to the point. "I need your help understanding something," he said casually. "How secure are airline reservation systems these days? Are they vulnerable to hacking?" Richard chuckled at the question. "Harold, you're asking me about hacking. You're supposed to be enjoying retirement." "I'm curious," Harold replied, brushing off the comment. "Just humor me." After a brief pause, Richard explained that while airlines invested heavily in security, many of their systems were built on outdated infrastructure. "Think of it like patchwork," he said. "They keep adding new layers without fixing the underlying issues. If someone really wanted to cause trouble, they could probably find a way in." That was all Harold needed to hear. He thanked Richard and ended the call, his mind already racing with possibilities. The next step was research. Harold spent hours combing through online forums, technical manuals, and news articles about aviation technology. He discovered that many airlines relied on interconnected systems that controlled everything from ticket bookings to flight schedules to maintenance logs. While these systems were designed to streamline operations, they also created potential weak points, vulnerabilities, that someone with the right knowledge could exploit. As days turned into weeks, Harold became consumed by his project. His modest apartment transformed into a makeshift command center. Papers covered every surface, detailing complex algorithms and flowcharts. Multiple monitors displayed lines of code, blinking notifications, and live feeds of airline activity. To anyone walking in, it might have looked chaotic, but to Harold it was perfectly organized chaos. The cornerstone of his plan was a sophisticated algorithm he called Skyfall. This program would infiltrate the airline's reservation system, causing widespread disruptions without leaving any trace of its origin. Skyfall worked by exploiting gaps in the airline's software, triggering a cascade of errors that would ripple across multiple flights. For example, it could generate fake passenger data, leading to overbooked flights. Or it could scramble seat assignments, forcing gate agents to manually reassign hundreds of tickets. But Harold didn't stop there. Knowing that mere inconvenience wouldn't fully satisfy his sense of justice, he added another layer to Skyfall: false maintenance alerts. These alerts would mimic real warnings about mechanical failures, such as engine malfunctions or hydraulic leaks. Pilots and ground crews would be forced to inspect planes repeatedly only to find nothing wrong. Each inspection would cost the airline thousands of dollars in lost revenue, not to mention the frustration of stranded passengers. What made Skyfall truly ingenious was its stealth. Harold programmed it to operate in short bursts, mimicking natural glitches rather than deliberate interference. Even experienced IT professionals would struggle to detect its presence, and because the algorithm ran remotely, Harold could activate it from anywhere in the world without ever setting foot near an airport. Despite his meticulous planning, Harold occasionally doubted whether he should go through with it. Was this really worth the effort? Could he justify potentially inconveniencing thousands of innocent travelers? But then he remembered the look on the gate agent's face, the dismissive tone, the rolled eyes, the cruel remark about old people. Those memories reignited his resolve. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about sending a message. Airlines couldn't treat their customers like disposable commodities and expect to get away with it. Finally, after months of preparation, Harold decided it was time to act. Late one night, he sat at his desk staring at the final version of Skyfall on his screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating for a split second. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed enter. Within minutes, the effects began to show. Across the country, flights started experiencing delays. Passengers received conflicting information about departure times. Gate agents scrambled to sort out seating arrangements. Social media erupted with complaints as frustrated travelers vented their anger online. Meanwhile, Harold watched it all unfold from the comfort of his recliner, sipping his coffee and scrolling through updates on his phone. No one suspected him. Why would they? Who would think an elderly man living in Queens could orchestrate such a massive disruption? To everyone else, it looked like yet another example of corporate incompetence. But Harold knew better. This was his masterpiece, his way of holding the airline accountable for their actions, and it was only the beginning. The chaos Harold Jenkins unleashed with Skyfall spread faster than even he had anticipated. Within hours of activating the program, the airline's operations began to crumble like a house of cards. What started as minor delays quickly escalated into full-blown cancellations, leaving thousands of passengers stranded in airports across the country. Families missed connecting flights, business travelers lost critical meetings, and holiday plans were ruined. The ripple effects extended far beyond individual inconveniences. It was a logistical nightmare that threatened to bring the entire aviation industry to its knees. At first, the airline tried to downplay the situation. Spokespeople appeared on news channels assuring viewers that the issues were temporary and would be resolved soon. But behind closed doors, executives were panicking. Their IT department worked around the clock, trying to identify the source of the problem. Engineers inspected planes for non-existent mechanical failures, while customer service agents fielded endless calls from irate passengers demanding answers. Despite their best efforts, nothing seemed to work. Every time they thought they had fixed one issue, another popped up somewhere else. Harold watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. From his apartment, he monitored live updates on his computer, tracking flight statuses and reading angry tweets from stranded travelers. Each headline brought a small smile to his face. Flight delays leave thousands stranded at major airports, read one article. Another declared, airline faces backlash over systemic failures. To Harold, these stories weren't just headlines. They were proof that his plan was working exactly as intended. But Harold wasn't content with mere disruption. He knew that financial losses alone wouldn't fully satisfy his sense of justice. If he wanted to leave a lasting impact, he needed to target something even more valuable, the airline's reputation. And so, he devised a second phase of his attack, one that would strike at the heart of public perception. Using anonymous accounts, Harold flooded review sites and social media platforms with fabricated stories about terrible experiences with the airline. Some posts claimed that luggage had gone missing for weeks, while others described rude staff members or unsafe conditions on board. He even created fake profiles of disgruntled former employees, alleging everything from poor maintenance practices to discriminatory hiring policies. These accusations gained traction almost instantly. People love drama, and the internet is a breeding ground for outrage. Before long, hashtags like #boycott Skyline Airlines, the fictional name of the targeted airline, began trending on Twitter. Influencers joined the conversation, sharing memes and videos mocking the company's incompetence. Competitors seized the opportunity to promote themselves, offering discounts to dissatisfied customers who switched loyalty programs. As the negative publicity mounted, the airline launched an expensive PR campaign to salvage its image. Billboards and TV commercials touted slogans like, "We're listening and your safety is our priority." Executives held press conferences, promising sweeping reforms and improved customer service. But no matter what they did, the damage continued to grow. Passengers filed lawsuits seeking compensation for missed events and ruined vacations. Regulators launched investigations into the airline's practices, further tarnishing its credibility. What made this phase of Harold's plan particularly devastating was its psychological toll on the airline's workforce. Ground staff and pilots, already stretched thin by the ongoing disruptions, now faced mounting pressure from both management and the public. Morale plummeted as employees grew increasingly frustrated with the lack of clear solutions. Some quit outright, unable to cope with the stress. Others staged protests, demanding better working conditions and accountability from leadership. Through it all, Harold remained invisible, a ghost lurking in the shadows of cyberspace. No one suspected that a soft-spoken elderly man living in Queens could be responsible for such widespread devastation. Most assumed the problem stemmed from internal mismanagement or external hackers. Even cybersecurity experts struggled to pinpoint the exact cause of the chaos. Yet Harold didn't feel guilt or remorse. In his mind, the airline had brought this upon itself. They had treated him, and countless others, with disdain, prioritizing profits over people. His actions were not an act of malice but a form of retribution, a way of forcing them to confront the consequences of their choices. Still, Harold couldn't ignore the human cost of his revenge. Late one night, as he scrolled through yet another wave of angry tweets, he came across a post from a young mother whose family vacation had been ruined because of the delays. Her frustration was palpable, and Harold felt a pang of unease. He reminded himself that this wasn't personal. It was about holding a powerful corporation accountable. But deep down, he wondered whether there was a line he shouldn't cross. Despite these fleeting doubts, Harold pressed on. He knew that true accountability required persistence. So he refined Skyfall, adding new features designed to prolong the chaos. For instance, he introduced random fluctuations in fuel pricing data, forcing the airline to pay inflated costs for jet fuel. He also tweaked the algorithm to target specific routes during peak travel seasons, maximizing the economic impact. As weeks turned into months, the airline teetered on the brink of collapse. Its stock price plummeted, wiping out billions in market value. Shareholders demanded answers and top executives resigned under pressure. Industry analysts speculated about bankruptcy filings and potential buyouts. Meanwhile, passengers voted with their wallets, choosing rival carriers over the beleaguered airline. And through it all, Harold sat quietly in his apartment, watching the empire he had helped dismantle fall apart piece by piece. He never gloated openly or sought recognition for his role in the crisis. To him, this wasn't about fame or glory. It was about sending a message. Corporations couldn't treat their customers like disposable commodities and expect to get away with it. But as effective as Harold's plan had been, he couldn't stay hidden forever. Somewhere, buried deep within the digital labyrinth he had created, lay clues that might eventually lead back to him. And when they did, the world would learn the truth about the elderly man who had single-handedly taken on one of the largest industries on Earth. For now, though, Harold allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. He leaned back in his recliner, sipping his coffee and flipping through the latest news reports. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the city in white. It was a peaceful scene, a stark contrast to the storm he had unleashed. Little did Harold know, the real battle was just beginning. As the chaos caused by Skyfall continued to escalate, it became clear that something, or someone, was orchestrating the airline's downfall with precision and skill. While most people assumed the disruptions were due to corporate incompetence or external hackers, A young cybersecurity analyst named Mia Parker began to suspect otherwise. Working for a private firm contracted by the airline to investigate the crisis, Mia had spent weeks poring over logs, analyzing patterns, and tracing anomalies in the system. What she discovered would change everything. Mia was only 26 years old, but her sharp instincts and relentless curiosity had already earned her a reputation as one of the best in her field. She had grown up tinkering with computers, teaching herself coding languages before she even graduated high school. Now, sitting in a dimly lit office filled with glowing monitors and scattered coffee cups, Mia focused intently on the data streaming across her screen. At first glance, the airline's issues appeared random, glitches here, delays there. But after days of digging deeper, Mia noticed something unusual, subtle markers hidden within the code. These weren't natural errors, they were deliberate, almost invisible traces left behind by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Her breakthrough came late one night when she isolated an IP address linked to several suspicious activities. Mia cross-referenced it with public databases and mapped its location. To her astonishment, the signal originated from a residential area in Queens, a neighborhood not typically associated with cybercriminals or tech masterminds. Intrigued, Mia decided to dig further. She pulled up satellite images of the building and cross-checked them against utility records. Eventually, she narrowed down the source to a single apartment belonging to Harold Jenkins, a retired aerospace engineer. At Tillon, first Mia struggled to believe her findings. How could an elderly man living alone be responsible for such widespread destruction? It seemed absurd, like something out of a movie. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Every piece of the puzzle pointed to Harold, from his technical expertise to his connection to outdated aviation systems. Determined to confirm her suspicions, Mia compiled a detailed report and presented it to her superiors. Initially, the airline executives dismissed her theory outright. "An old man?" one of them scoffed during a meeting. "That's ridiculous. We're dealing with professional hackers, not some retiree playing games." But Mia refused to back down. She argued passionately, presenting screenshots, timestamps, and behavioral analysis to support her claims. "This isn't just about age," she insisted. "It's about knowledge. Whoever did this knows the airline industry inside and out, and Harold Jenkins fits that profile perfectly." Eventually, her persistence paid off. Law enforcement agreed to take the matter seriously, dispatching agents to Harold's apartment under the pretense of a routine inquiry. When they arrived, they expected resistance or denial. Instead, they found Harold calmly waiting for them, in his armchair surrounded by stacks of papers, blueprints, and glowing computer screens. "Good evening, officers." Harold greeted them with a faint smile. "I assume you're here about Skyfall?" The agents exchanged stunned glances. They hadn't mentioned any specific details about their investigation. "How did you know why we're here?" one of them asked cautiously. Harold chuckled softly. "Because I designed it," he replied matter-of-factly. "And because I've been expecting you for quite some time now." What followed was a surreal conversation. Harold confessed immediately, explaining his motives in simple terms. He recounted the incident at the airport, the invalid ticket, the dismissive gate agent, and the humiliating remark about old people traveling alone. "They disrespected me," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "They disrespected. Everyone who flies, someone had to hold them accountable." The agents listened in disbelief as Harold walked them through his plan, pointing out lines of code on his monitors and describing how each component of Skyfall worked. He spoke with clarity and confidence, leaving no doubt that he was telling the truth. By the end of the explanation, even the most skeptical agent couldn't deny Harold's brilliance or his audacity. News of Harold's arrest spread quickly, sparking a media frenzy unlike anything the aviation industry had ever seen. Reporters camped outside his apartment building, eager to catch a glimpse of the unlikely mastermind. Headlines blared across newspapers and websites. "Elderly man behind airline chaos," "Retirees' revenge costs billions," and "the quiet genius who took down an industry." Public opinion was divided. Some viewed Harold as a criminal whose actions endangered innocent travelers and destabilized an entire sector. Others saw him as a modern-day Robin Hood, a vigilante fighting against corporate greed and systemic neglect. Social media erupted with memes and debates, with hashtags like #TrueHaroldHero trending worldwide. Meanwhile, Harold faced legal consequences for his actions. Prosecutors argued that his interference had caused billions of dollars in damages and inconvenienced millions of passengers. Defense attorneys countered that Harold's intent wasn't malicious but rather a form of protest against mistreatment. After weeks of heated courtroom drama, Harold struck a plea deal. In exchange for assisting authorities in strengthening aviation cybersecurity, he avoided prison time and received a reduced sentence of community service and probation. Throughout the trial, Harold remained composed, speaking rarely but always with purpose. When asked during sentencing if he had any regrets, he paused thoughtfully before answering. "Regret implies remorse, and I don't feel remorseful," he said. "What I did was wrong in the eyes of the law, yes. But sometimes laws aren't enough to ensure justice. Sometimes you have to shake things up to make people listen." His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations about accountability, ethics, and the treatment of vulnerable populations, like the elderly. Airlines scrambled to improve customer service, upgrade outdated systems, and implement stricter training protocols for staff. Regulators launched investigations into industry practices, leading to widespread reforms aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. For Harold, the ordeal marked both an end and a beginning. Though he returned to his quiet life in Queens, he couldn't escape the spotlight entirely. Documentaries, interviews, and even a Hollywood biopic chronicled his story, cementing his place in history as one of the most unconventional whistleblowers of all time. Yet despite the fame, or infamy, he garnered, Harold remained humble. He continued tinkering with gadgets in his spare time, occasionally offering advice to young engineers inspired by his work. And whenever he boarded a plane, which he still did occasionally, he couldn't help but smile at the irony. The man, who had once been thrown off a flight, now held the power to bring the entire industry to its knees. In the end, Harold's legacy wasn't just about revenge or retribution. It was about challenging the status quo and reminding corporations that their customers mattered. Whether hero or villain, Harold Jenkins forced the world to pay attention, and that, perhaps, was his greatest achievement of all. Harold Jenkins' story didn't end with his plea deal or the reforms that followed. In fact, it was only the beginning of a legacy that would ripple across industries, inspire countless debates, and leave an indelible mark on society. His actions, though controversial, sparked conversations about accountability, corporate responsibility, and the treatment of ordinary people by powerful institutions. For Harold, this was more than revenge. It was a message to the world that even the most overlooked individuals could make their voices heard. In the months following his trial, Harold became both a hero and a cautionary tale. On one hand, many admired his ingenuity and determination. They saw him as a symbol of resistance against corporate greed and systemic neglect. "He stood up for all of us," said one passenger in an interview after missing yet another delayed flight due to unrelated issues. "If airlines can treat someone like Harold so poorly, what hope do the rest of us have?" On the other hand, critics argued that Harold's methods were reckless and dangerous. While they acknowledged his grievances, they believed there were better ways to address them without causing widespread disruption. "What if someone had been hurt because of his actions?" asked a frequent traveler during a televised debate. "You can't justify endangering millions of lives just to prove a point." Despite the polarizing opinions, everyone agreed on one thing: Harold's story was unforgettable. It captured the imagination of millions, inspiring memes, fan art, and even a Hollywood biopic titled Skyfall: The Man Who Broke the Airlines. Portrayed by an acclaimed actor, Harold's character was depicted as a quiet but brilliant rebel who used his intellect to take on a Goliath-like corporation. The film grossed millions at the box office and earned critical acclaim for its portrayal of justice, morality, and the human spirit. But beyond pop culture, Harold's impact extended into real-world change. Airlines worldwide scrambled to overhaul their systems, investing heavily in cybersecurity and customer service improvements. New regulations were introduced, requiring companies to adopt stricter protocols for handling elderly passengers and resolving ticket disputes. Employees underwent mandatory sensitivity training, learning how to treat customers with respect regardless of age, background, or circumstance. For Harold, however, the most rewarding outcome was seeing the tangible difference his actions made. One day, while browsing online forums, he stumbled upon a heartfelt post from a young woman thanking him for what he had done. Her grandmother, who relied on air travel to visit family, had often complained about being treated poorly at airports. After Harold's intervention, she noticed a noticeable shift in how staff interacted with older passengers. "Because of you," the woman wrote, "my grandma feels seen again." Reading those words brought tears to Harold's eyes. He realized then that his mission had transcended personal vendettas. It had become something bigger than himself. Though he never sought recognition, he couldn't deny the sense of fulfillment that came from knowing he had made a difference. Still, life wasn't without its challenges. Despite avoiding prison, Harold faced lingering scrutiny from authorities and the public. Some viewed him as a menace, questioning whether he might attempt something similar in the future. Others saw him as a genius, whose talents were wasted in retirement. Offers poured in, from tech startups seeking his expertise to universities inviting him to lecture, but Harold politely declined them all. "I've had my moment in the spotlight," he told a reporter during a rare interview. "Now I'd rather focus on the little things. Reading, tinkering, spending time with my grandchildren. That's where true happiness lies." And focus on the little things he did. Back in his apartment, Harold returned to his quiet routines, though they now carried a sense of purpose. He spent hours working on small projects, building gadgets, and tools that solved everyday problems. Occasionally, he mentored young engineers, sharing stories from his career and offering advice on navigating the complexities of the modern world. One such protege was Mia Parker, the cybersecurity analyst, who had uncovered his identity. Though their initial encounter had been tense, Mia developed a deep respect for Harold over time. She visited him regularly, bringing updates on the latest advancements in aviation technology and discussing ethical dilemmas in her field. Together, they explored ways to use technology responsibly, ensuring it served humanity rather than harming it. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," Harold told her during one of their meetings. "Curious, driven, unafraid to ask tough questions. Don't lose that spark, it's what makes you extraordinary." Mia smiled, grateful for his guidance. Under his mentorship, she went on to develop innovative solutions that strengthened aviation security worldwide. Years later, she credited Harold as her greatest influence, dedicating her achievements to the man who had inspired her to think differently. As for Harold, he continued living his life with quiet dignity. He traveled occasionally, always choosing flights operated by airlines that had embraced his call for reform. During these trips, he marveled at the changes he had helped bring about: smiling gate agents, efficient boarding processes, and compassionate interactions between staff and passengers. Each experience reinforced his belief that progress was possible, even in the face of resistance. Yet Harold never forgot the lessons he had learned along the way. He understood that power dynamics could shift, that corporations could grow complacent, and that vigilance was necessary to maintain accountability. So he kept a watchful eye, ready to speak up whenever he noticed injustice creeping back into the system. In his final years, Harold reflected on his journey with a mixture of pride and humility. He had started as an ordinary man dismissed by the very industry he had once helped build. But through sheer determination and unwavering conviction, he had transformed into a figure who commanded attention and respect. When Harold passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 92, tributes poured in from around the globe. News outlets hailed him as a pioneer, a provocateur, and a visionary. Passengers shared stories of how his actions had improved their travel experiences. Industry leaders acknowledged his role in driving positive change. Even former critics admitted that despite his methods, Harold had forced them to confront uncomfortable truths. Today, Harold Jenkins is remembered not just as the man who took down an airline, but as a reminder of the power of individual action. His story serves as a testament to the idea that no matter how insignificant we may feel, we all have the ability to challenge the status quo and demand better from the world around us. In a quiet corner of Queens, his apartment remains untouched, filled with papers, blueprints, and monitors, a shrine to a remarkable life. And somewhere among those items lies a simple note Harold wrote shortly before his death. Justice isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and unyielding, but it always leaves a mark. And leave a mark Harold Jenkins certainly did.